The institution they spent 3 years publicly dismantling may now require them to empty their pockets before they can walk through its door. That is not a metaphor. According to reports now circulating across the British press, palace aides have been discussing one extraordinary condition ahead of any potential meeting between Harry, Meghan, and King Charles. The Sussexes could be asked to surrender their devices before they are permitted anywhere near the king. Phones, handed over, at the door of the palace they once fled and then spent years describing as a place of cruelty, institutional racism, and deliberate neglect. Think about what that image actually means. This is not a family asking a visiting relative to leave their work calls outside. This is an institution that absorbed years of Netflix documentaries, a 600-page memoir, and a globally televised Oprah interview, now sitting behind its own walls and saying, quietly and very clearly, "We do not trust you. And if you want access, these are our terms." The power has shifted completely. What makes it more striking is that Harry and Meghan are not being dragged back to Britain. They are choosing to come. They have reportedly agreed to stay in a royal residence offered by King Charles. They have hired a new crisis PR team. They are, by every credible account, attempting to engineer a reconciliation visit around the 2027 Invictus Games in Birmingham. Tom Bower, the royal author who knows this world as well as anyone, described it with two words that have since echoed across every royal commentary platform in Britain: bended knees. And somewhere at the center of all of this sits a photograph that does not yet exist, an image of King Charles with Archie and Lilibet, that some believe would be worth more to the Sussex brand than everything they have built in California combined. We will come back to that photograph, because by the end of this, the full picture of what it represents will redefine whether this visit was ever about reconciliation at all. But before we reveal what the palace is truly prepared to demand, you need to understand exactly how Harry and Meghan ended up crawling back to the institution they spent 3 years burning to the ground. It did not happen overnight. The collapse of the Sussex project, and it is fair to call it a project because that is precisely what it was, unfolded across 3 years of miscalculations so consistent they began to look less like bad luck and more like a structural flaw in the entire enterprise. The Netflix deal, announced with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for heads of state, was supposed to prove that Harry and Meghan didn't need the crown. The series landed in December 2022. The ratings were reasonable, the critical reception was not. More damaging than any review, though, was what came after: silence. Netflix did not rush to commission more. The follow-up projects dried up. The couple who had presented themselves as a global content powerhouse were struggling to fill a slate. Spotify was worse. The Archetypes podcast was canceled in June 2023 after a single season, and a senior Spotify executive, with a frankness that felt almost deliberately public, described the arrangement as a loss. The word he used was sharper than that, but the meaning was unmistakable. $35 million, and the platform walked away. Harry's memoir, Spare, sold aggressively in its first week, then did what most revenge narratives do. It aged badly. The revelations that were meant to reframe the public conversation instead calcified opinion on both sides of the Atlantic. In Britain, his approval ratings hit levels that would concern a minor local councillor. In America, the sympathy that had once felt durable began to thin. This is the context Tom Bower is describing when he talks about bended knees. He is not being melodramatic. He is being precise, because by early 2024, the financial architecture that was supposed to free Harry and Meghan from royal dependency was visibly straining. The Montecito lifestyle, the security costs, the philanthropy infrastructure, the staff, does not run cheap, and the income streams that were meant to sustain it were narrowing. Then came the crisis PR hire. Meghan brought in a new communication strategist, someone with a specific background in reputation rehabilitation. That is not what you do when you are planning a quiet family trip. That is what you do when you are preparing a campaign. The Invictus Games in Birmingham in 2027 provides a reason to return that sounds selfless. Wounded veterans. A cause Harry genuinely cares about. Nobody argues with that, which is precisely why it works so well as cover. And yet, even with a crisis PR team now deployed and a royal residence allegedly offered by King Charles himself, the palace has quietly been building a response that the Sussexes almost certainly did not anticipate. The palace's response, when you map it out detail by detail, does not look like a welcome. It looks like architecture. Carefully constructed, load-bearing, designed to hold something in place rather than let it move freely. Start with the devices. Multiple sources familiar with the internal discussions have reported that one of the conditions floated for any meaningful reconciliation, or at the very least, any sustained royal access, involves Harry surrendering the materials at the center of his ongoing legal exposure: phones, hard drives, the recorded evidence that has already fed one memoir and could theoretically feed need another. The palace knows what documentation exists because Harry himself has made clear in court filings and in print that he kept records. Asking for those records back is not a gesture of trust. It is a demand for disarmament. Harry has not agreed. That silence speaks volumes. Then there is what is conspicuously absent. William has made no public overture, no statement, no leaked warmth, no briefing to sympathetic correspondence suggesting the brothers are inching toward each other. Nothing. Camilla, who now holds the title of Queen and the institutional authority that comes with it, has been equally silent. In palace terms, silence from those two is not neutral. It is a position. It communicates, without the reputational cost of saying so openly, that the return is being tolerated at the senior level, but it is not being endorsed. That distinction matters enormously. Charles can extend the olive branch, or what looks like one, while the rest of the working royal structure remains closed. Harry and Meghan come back, but they come back to a court that has not thawed. And then there is Associated Newspapers. The ongoing lawsuit involving the Daily Mail's publisher is still moving through the British legal system, and its outcome carries direct consequences for how the Sussexes' return is perceived and processed. If the ruling goes against them, it hands their critics a fresh weapon at the exact moment they are trying to rebuild credibility. If it goes in their favor, it changes their negotiating position considerably. The palace is watching that case with an interest it has never publicly acknowledged. They do not need to act. They simply need to wait. What the palace has apparently decided it is comfortable with is a specific controlled image: King Charles, Archie and Lilibet, grandfather and grandchildren. A photograph that reads as family, as feeling, as generational continuity. That image serves the crown because it shows Charles as a compassionate patriarch. It humanizes the monarchy at a moment when it needs warmth, and it keeps the children, British-born heirs with a legitimate place in the line of succession, connected to the institution. Notice who is not in that photograph. Meghan is not in that photograph. And that is not an accident of scheduling. That is a statement about exactly how far the rehabilitation extends and where it stops. Harry may be granted proximity. The children may be granted visibility. But Meghan's formal reintegration into the royal image, the version of events where she stands alongside the king and the cameras record it, has not been sanctioned. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But the photograph, that single image of King Charles with Archie and Lilibet, is where the entire calculation reaches its most ruthless point. Charles knows exactly what that photograph means. He did not become king by misreading the room, and he has not survived the last 3 years of Sussex turbulence by being naive about optics. So when that image of him with Archie and Lilibet was taken, every person in his inner circle understood what was being created and what was being handed over. Because here is the brutal geometry of it. Harry and Meghan spent the better part of 2 years dismantling the royal brand from the outside. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, Spare, each one was a calculated strike at the institution's credibility, its history, its most senior members. The damage was real. The polling numbers shifted. The international coverage turned corrosive. And through all of it, the one weapon the Sussexes could never fully deploy was the children. Because the children had no visible connection to the family they were supposedly being kept from. That photograph changes the equation entirely. The moment Charles appears alongside Archie and Lilibet in an image that circulates globally, he does not just demonstrate warmth. He authenticates them. He inserts them back into the royal visual record. And Harry and Meghan, who have built a significant portion of their American narrative around the idea that the royal family rejected their children, questioned their identity, denied them belonging, now have evidence to the contrary that carries the king's own face in it. That is an extraordinary asset to hand to people who have proven repeatedly that they know how to use assets, which puts Charles in a position with no clean exits. Refuse the photograph, keep the grandchildren at arm's length, and every journalist in the world writes the same story. That the king punished 2 small children for their parents' behavior. That is politically untenable. It confirms the cruelest version of the Sussex narrative and delivers it wrapped in proof. But grant the photograph freely and you have handed a couple who sued your institution, attacked your family, and monetized their grievances a piece of royal legitimacy they can deploy whenever the Archewell revenue stream needs a boost. And Meghan's specific exclusion from the frame, if that was a palace decision, and the evidence suggests it was, tells you everything about how precisely this has been calculated. The children are permitted, their mother is not. The line has been drawn with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, and this is where the story stops being about a family visit and starts being about something far colder. A power negotiation with children as the highest value piece on the board. Power does not usually announce itself this openly. Institutions that hold the advantage rarely need to list their terms. The fact that Kensington Palace's reported conditions were specific enough to leak device surrender, security protocols, defined access windows, suggests something important. They were designed to be known, not just by Harry and Meghan, by everyone watching. That is not a negotiation. That is a demonstration. What has happened here, quietly and without a single official admission, is a complete inversion of the dynamic that defined the Sussex departure. In 2020, Harry and Meghan held the initiative. They chose their timing, they controlled their narrative, they launched their exit on their own terms, and spent the following 4 years converting royal grievance into a transatlantic media business. The palace was reactive, wounded, and, at least in public, largely silent. That silence is now over. The reported conditions represent the institution reasserting itself with something colder than anger. Strategic patience. They have waited. They have watched the Archwell balance sheets, the Netflix numbers, the Spotify collapse, the book sales curve. And they have chosen this moment, when the Sussex commercial proposition is visibly weakening, to present a set of terms that force a binary choice with no comfortable exit. If Harry and Meghan accept, they enter the family home on the palace's conditions. Photographed on the palace's schedule, stripped of the devices that feed their operation. They confirm in practice that the institution holds authority over them even now. Every future Archwell release about royal mistreatment will carry the footnote that they submitted to palace terms to get through the door. If they refuse, they are the people who denied their children a relationship with dying grandparents over a phone policy. That is not a position any communications team can spin into dignity. Both doors lead to the same room. The palace knows it. The Sussexes almost certainly know it too. What makes this moment genuinely historic is not the visit itself. Royal reconciliations have happened before, usually quietly and usually incompletely. What is historic is the explicit, documented leverage being applied to achieve it. Which brings us to the one detail buried beneath every palace statement and Sussex denial that changes the entire meaning of this visit. The visit is scheduled. The cameras will come. The images of Harry and Meghan crossing back into royal orbit will be broadcast everywhere. And for approximately 48 hours the narrative will be warmth and healing and the king's generous heart. Then the court ruling lands. Multiple legal actions connected to the Sussexes' ongoing disputes with British press institutions are approaching judgment. Palace lawyers are not unaware of the calendar. If those rulings go badly, and the palace has had considerably longer to model the possibilities than Harry has, any goodwill imagery generated by the visit becomes instant collateral damage. Charles looks magnanimous for having tried. The Sussexes look like they flew to London for a photo opportunity while their illegal conduct was being formally condemned in a British courtroom. The reconciliation, in other words, may have been timed not to succeed but to neutralize. That is either a breathtaking institutional chess move or a coincidence so convenient it barely deserves the word. Either way, Harry and Meghan are walking into it. And the most unsettling question is not whether they know, it is whether knowing would change anything at all. If you think the British monarchy still has moves people underestimate, subscribe to Regal Desk. We watch the ones nobody else is watching.